Yeah, Wilson. Where's it me? Okay. All right. Now, welcome everybody. This is the City Council Committee of the Whole special meeting, Thursday, March 26th. Um, so I guess we're going to be continuing the budget stabilization discussion. Sorry, the budget strategies discussion. And I think since our budget and finance chair is not here, I'll just lead the meeting then. All right. So I think if we can call the spreadsheet up on the screen. Okay, thanks. Yeah, so to recap, at the Budget and Finance meeting, we unveiled a spreadsheet that does a calculation of not only the running total of the unallocated fund balance, but we're also explicitly calling out the general fund deficit. We're also talking about what our reserve is, what our reserve level should be, as well as calling out specifically the budget stabilization and the strategic opportunities funds. And so any potential levy that we might talk about, property tax levy we might talk about, can also be factored in as well. So I think it's in terms of its completeness, we've covered pretty much everything. And I think the discussion left off last time, and correct me if I'm wrong since I was not here, on three questions. First, are we going to be revenue based or expenditure based in terms of the budget? Second, that what is the reserve level we need to maintain? Whether it's a percentage number of days or dollar amount doesn't really matter. It's the same idea. And then finally, we're discussing what the allocation to each of the two buckets, the budget stabilization and the strategic opportunity funds, ought to be. So I think what I'll kick this off with is, since I wasn't there, I'll just get, top of mind. Yeah, and I have not spoken to the finance director, so I'm not sure what, was discussed here. But in terms of the revenue versus expenditure, I think basically the argument was made that expenditure based makes more sense. And I'm not versed enough to know myself what that means. But if basically many of the experts are saying that that's a good idea, then I'm certainly willing to give that a try. And I don't know if the finance director wants to weigh in.
Yeah, absolutely. And I appreciate you giving that quick recap. As that is, those are kind of the three questions we are here to kind of continue with tonight. Um, and and either way, currently, right now, as it stands, our comprehensive financial management policy is 16%, which is a GFOA best practice. I know we're not supposed to do that. A Governmental Finance Officers Association, GFOA, um, of 16 day or 16%. We do follow that. And it is currently based on revenues. And most cities do lean to the expenditure side. And now that our city administrator has the spreadsheet up, I will go ahead and let him. Do you want to walk into that?
So after the last meeting, Councilmember Riddle went back to work and created this. This is a variation of the same spreadsheet that you saw last time. So it functions the same. There were some requests for name changes. I haven't looked at this for a couple days, so I'm not sure everything's captured here. We've also worked on some definitions, which are on another tab that I can show you as well. But I can run this from here. Depending on where you want to go with your discussion. So whatever you need us to plug in to help with your discussion of how you want to move forward. I think last time where we left it, Councilmember or Vice Chair Goldman had given some recommendations on how he thought budget stabilization and strategic opportunity fund should be funded. I really think that's where the discussion around those and your reserves would inform future discussions around potential levies, et cetera. So,
Sure. And yeah, so I think just to pick up on that theme, Vice Chair Goldman, you can also disagree with me, but I think you had mentioned 500,000 in the Strategic Opportunities Fund based off of what we spent on the Lakefront Park, and then 6 million in the Budget Stabilization Fund, which would leave us $1 million to disperse each year until 2000, what is it, 32? So, and I think that's a reasonably sensible idea. I think basically having, we were discussing smaller amounts the last time I had this discussion, and we'd soon run out of the budget stabilization fund if we were trying to cover the structural deficit. $1 million a year at least buys some time, which I think is kind of the name of this game. So does anybody want to pick up on that? Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
If you remember back when I presented the first spreadsheet, I had thrown $1 million in there to the budget stabilization fund. And what that does really is allows council to begin the discussion of if you were going to go out for a levy in the future, using that to buy down the rate.
Right.
It just shows a dedication from the council of allocating dollars strictly towards writing down that structural deficit. And so whatever amount you put in there obviously draws away from what you have in your unallocated fund balance to do other things with, but it drives down a rate that you would need
Right.
in say a first 6-year levy. If a levy passed, at the end of that 6 years, you wouldn't have that opportunity again to buy down the rate. So there would be more disparity in future rates than in the current rate. So just a couple of things to keep in mind.
Right.
If I may, Mr. Chair, just from echoing what Administrator Hill said, I think that one of the most important things for this community to do is think about consideration of the future. Obviously, we're talking about, forward-thinking budgeting here. And yes, it absolutely makes sense to effectively buy down the levy rate if at all possible. It also makes a lot of sense to invest in economic future of the community. And I think that if we bought down, for example, the consideration of levy rate and made the levy rate commensurate with what you invest in a different fund, you buy down with those amounts, that amount of money, where you get to the end of a certain period of time and you have nothing left, and you're in a difficult place where, in my opinion, I think we need to be thinking about sort of a balance of saying there's a compromise with the community and saying, you said we don't appreciate this levy for X, Y, and Z. So buy it down a little bit and a modest amount, and then use the additional funds to put aside for a rainy day in case a levy does not happen, and also to invest in our future. I think that is really, really key, because we cannot continue to do what we're doing. We've got a lot of different things here, and if we just put the money into a large bucket that is buying down the levy rate, we're still gonna, if we get to the end of the levy and we can't renew it, we're in deep trouble. We have to have some sort of additional step that forward thinks.
Okay.
Yeah.
And go ahead.
Okay, I hear what you're saying. So in reference to that, what would you put in the budget stabilization? Is that would you put in this, if Larry is suggesting 6 million, you mentioned, and Phil mentioned 1 million.
I would concur with what Phil said about $1 million into the budget stabilization. Look at that. It still leaves you with a considerable amount of money that can be put into strategic opportunity or some other place to make sure that we're not literally
Correct. And isn't there
in the coffers, so to speak.
isn't there some effort, isn't there some mechanisms that we have to go through in order to pull the money out of the budget stabilization fund? Or we just draw it out, or do we have to go through a process?
It can flow. It can flow between the general fund and the budget stabilization fund. And there isn't anything that's restricted as far as that. As your finance director, I would do that with you, making sure that council's very aware of what's happening through that movement of money, even though it's in the same technical bucket of the main bucket of the general fund. But I would do that, keeping you guys very informed of the movement of the money.
So to clarify, then it's the strategic opportunity fund that has more efforts to use it. It
Correct.
requires action of the council.
Correct. That's, as was discussed in the past when this was used, no projects were identified. The administration had to come before council and present the possible expenditure of those funds and get approval.
And just one final clarification point, both of those funds roll up into the reserve,
Into the general, unallocated general fund.
unallocated.
Not reserves,
Yes.
but unallocated general fund.
And if I could just clarify one thing, that Councilmember Good, kind of going down the path of the budget stabilization fund, it all would depend on how council set it up. So in my example, and $1 million was just for example, if you were to use that to buy down the rate and go out for a levy and say it passed, then you would be saying that we're going to allocate a third of that over each biennium until it's gone. And so you're technically restricting those funds to making that buy down of something you would have to do. You couldn't then roll it back in.
No, I know, yeah, I realize that we've talked about these things before, but I just want to go over it in case other people are listening. Or afterwards. So thank you.
All right. Thanks. So actually, I just want to acknowledge that Budget and Finance Chair Riddle is here, and so I'm going to turn over the meeting to you. I do have one quick comment though, and that's I love this idea of the buy down. I had not thought of it that way before, but basically, so I think when the calculation was done some time ago, $1 million in the budget stabilization would buy down the rate, what, 2 cents or something like that?
Based off my early calculations, and don't quote me on this, about 3 or 4 cents.
3 or 4 cents. Okay.
So,
All right.
and it will all depend at the end of the day if we get there, but it's that rough order of magnitude.
Of course. All right. Thank you very much. All right.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. My cat escaped on my way out, so I am delayed. My apologies. Cat comes first. Yes, so thank you for handing it over. So, yeah, and I think the current budget stabilization fund policy is that we revisit that during the biennial budget and mid-biennial budget to see if we need to move money there. But I think it is something that's a lot more flexible than the strategic opportunity fund, which requires like a resolution of the council to move any money out of. So just to come back to where we are, the budget stabilization fund does have some additional, did we talk about the current additional policy restrictions around the budget stabilization fund? Okay.
No.
Okay, so there are some restrictions in that fund in our municipal code that we would have to look at. At this moment, per the policy, I think we could put a max of about 1.3 and change in there to meet the current policy. And that's because there is it's around percentages, but you can only put 10% of your unallocated funds into that budget stabilization fund at any one time. So if we are looking at something larger, it would require a policy change as well. So it's just one thing to keep in mind as we look at some of these numbers. And there's reasons that the policy was there. I wasn't around when that one was made. Neither was Finance Director Vaughn, but there are some reasons around that. So we'd have to think very carefully if we're going to be making some of those policy changes. And then I mean, I feel like if we wanted to put more in there within the policy, that 1.3 million is kind of our cap. So I don't know if Phil would want to see who's got the control.
Councilmember Rosenau's waiting to ask a question.
Oh, yes, Councilmember Rosenau.
Hi, just to follow up on what Tracy was saying just before you
And
came
You
in.
might be muted. We
Oh,
can't hear
I'm
you.
not hearing you and it looks like you're off mute. Can you check your technologies on your side, sir?
Is this any different?
I can hear Josh just fine. Has to be something in the room.
I can hear him too.
Is it working now? No.
It's on his
I
end.
think, yeah, because I don't see the red mute on your, speak up if you do get your audio back online and we'll hop right over to you. Is that okay, Councilmember? It has to be because I can't hear you. I'm reading your mind.
Okay.
Yeah, we're good on our end. Okay, we're good on.
Test.
Well,
Actually, Councilmember Muhlenberg just said that he can hear Councilmember Rosenau. And so it's an us problem if we can't hear them.
Okay, our speaker is working though.
I can hear him too.
Well, you guys are super special.
But we just heard
I
Councilmember
know.
Saunders.
I
We
hear
can hear,
them, but not
There you
me.
go.
I
There
can
you
hear
are.
you now.
Yeah.
Now you can hear me. Okay, great. Perfect. Magic. The question just occurred to me as when Councilmember Furtani was talking just before you came in, Semra, and just in my own head wanting to clarify, if we buy down the rate now, we don't have to go above in a subsequent levy. We would not have to go above necessarily, but we would be going up from whatever rate we would then establish in order to maintain the status quo would mean then raising the levy rate by 3, 4, 5 cents the next time around. Is that correct?
Yes,
Right.
we would have to rebalance it, or if we have some additional one-time funds, we can see about rebalancing it on our end as well, but we would have to do something at the end of this potential levy period. Councilmember Goldman.
Yes, thanks. So I recognized last week that at the end of the budget meeting, I made a very thought-provoking statement. To kind of clarify my thoughts a bit, in a sense, if the assumption is that whatever we put into the budget stabilization fund is going to be spent over the course of 6 years, then in one sense, the amount doesn't really matter. While the amount after 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 years will be different, the amount in our general fund after 6 years will be the same regardless. And so there is that. And so I think it boils down to the narrative we want to tell. The one that I proposed was we have a huge structural deficit, and it's meant to represent that. The other narrative I'm hearing is we can use this to essentially buy down the levy rate. I think those are both totally reasonable narratives to tell. And so I think it really is just, how do we communicate this to the public?
Thank you for that comment. Yeah, and I think I was hoping to be able to get some numbers into revenue, budget stabilization, and strategic opportunity fund so that when we come into the levy conversation, we can focus a little bit more on that one topic, but they do tie together. That's correct. Was there a comment from the Director Vaughn?
I just wanted to highlight, circling back to Councilmember Goldman's point. Currently, right now, in the budget stabilization, the Lake Forest Park Municipal Code, there is a restriction on it to state that it can be 10% max of an annual expenditures. However, we definitely, as a community, can change that code and make it more user-friendly for whatever the intention is. So just because that requires a change and some work, I just don't want that to be off of the table because it doesn't fit exactly with how the code states right now. If the intention and the will of the entire council is to show the budget stabilization fund exactly as he just presented, then we can just change the code and to honor that intention and the narrative to make sure that we're consistent.
Thank you. Ms. Mayor.
Yeah, thank you very much, Madam Chair. I think one more thing, just building on what Vice Chair Goldman said, I think there's the other bucket is the conversation of building for the community. I think that's the other thing, because you get to the end of this cycle, whatever you do, whether there's a levy or not a levy, you still have a structural challenge. So what is it that we as a community and neighbors are saying that we can do to invest in the future? That's where I come back to the one-time fund balances we can buy it down. We could buy it down for ostensibly for 2.5, 3 years. But you go beyond that. We're even yesterday and today, we're having additional expenditures that are coming across our plates. We're going, oh my gosh, these are things that are unanticipated. And so I think the narrative too has to be that third conversation about what is it that the council would like to do to invest in the future. And I think that that's something I'm going to push that really hard. I think it's imperative because otherwise we're at the end of this and we do it all over again. And we never want to get, none of us, I know, having served with you guys for a long time, most of you, none of you want to get to the place where it's one time, it's a election cycle budget consideration. It's way beyond that. I know you're committed to that.
Councilmember,
So,
or Deputy Mayor
yeah,
Bertrand.
I mean, you're absolutely right. There's really only two things we can do. You can cut expenses, which we've done, or we can basically grow revenues, which is an indirect way of doing it because we're not going to apply another tax or anything like that. What it means is that we have to invest in the economic vitality of this community. And so is it literally to buy the building next door? I mean, this is what it comes down to, right? I mean, do we want to be the masters of our own fate by basically doing something like that? Do we get in that business? Do we have the capacity? I think we do. And so maybe that's what we need to start looking at is bolstering the strategic opportunity fund so that we can actually invest in something like that and grow basically our tax base that way.
And Councilmember Rosenau?
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I think that if it's going to be, I think also in terms of a narrative for a levy, being able to say in exchange for higher taxes, there is something new that you get is easier than in exchange for higher taxes, we will maintain the status quo. And so that was a harder conversation to have and explain why it's no one's fault in the city, but it is the case, but that nonetheless, in order to just maintain a status quo, that was necessary. Whereas if there is some reasonably inspiring, exciting thing, and I think that is the intention of CARES and ARPA, was to rebuild and grow and come back stronger from the challenges of the pandemic, and not just to keep things as they are, but to make something better. And so I think if we can find something above and beyond that we can commit to and deliver, because that's going to be the other really key thing in that event, I think that's going to be stronger and we'll come out of it better. It'll be better all around.
Thank you. Mayor, did you have another comment?
Yeah, just on point. And thank you, Madam Chair. I apologize for interjecting here, but absolutely, Councilmember Rosenau, I think what you said is very astute. I think one of the things to recognize is the levy is any consideration of levy is going to be very discreet about from what you decide to do with the strategic opportunity fund. So it's very important to make that distinction. If you're choosing to use the funds, ending fund balances for something that's very different than, levy specific consideration. I think it's very important that we're very careful about that. I see Mr. Hill looking very thoughtful. As my conscience, please speak, sir.
I just go back to what the deputy mayor said on the purchase of a building. And I try to understand how that would drive revenue for the city other than being a landlord. Anything we own comes off the property tax rolls, so you lose that tax. But who are your end users? Who manages that for you? So it just brings a whole slew of thoughts to my head. I don't have answers for it now, but just wanted to throw that out.
If
you'd like to respond, yeah.
If I can address the city administrator's point, yeah, you're right. Of course, it does come off the tax rolls, but if that's a place where we could put our proposed regional traffic court, since we don't have room for that right now in this building, we would have to find that space. That would be the revenue generator, right? Is that, again, basically in sort of an indirect way, but nevertheless, it would give us space to do that, which would potentially bring in more traffic camera revenue. So there's that, plus being able to lease our services, as it were, to other municipalities.
And I appreciate that. I think that's a long conversation. How would you tie that to this specific point in time where we're budget stabilization versus strategic opportunity? Are you recommending we put more money in the strategic opportunity to give us that opportunity in the future? Is that
You
your
read my mind.
argument? Okay.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay.
Councilmember Good.
So, with the thoughts of going out for a levy and you're putting amounts of money in these funds, it might turn around and say, are going to ask, why are you asking for a levy when you have this money in these funds? So it makes sense to cheat people that if you say, hey, we have money in this fund so we can buy down the cost of the levy. But if there's other dollars that are in there, the messaging around those dollars has to be very precise, or there might be pushback at seeing large amounts of money in these funds that is just sitting there.
Yes. And I would like to comment. I think we need to balance the community's comments during the last levy of, but you have money to spend. Why are you coming to us already? And I think if we were to provide some funding in the budget stabilization fund, one, it shows that we heard. We are dedicating some of this money into there while reserving enough that we can continue to address other types of contingencies that may be coming up. I think the Strategic Opportunity Fund can be leveraged very well for a lot larger, purchases, as we saw for the lakefront property. It doesn't take a ton of money in there in order for us to be able to leverage that into something really amazing for the community. My conservative and community responsive suggestion is that we stay somewhat controlled on the Strategic Opportunity Fund and utilize that as leveraging grants and other things to increase its purchasing power, and look at putting funds into the Budget Stabilization Fund, essentially earmarking it to be used for operations to offset the ask of the community. We will have to ask the community in 6 years if we were to do this and they were to approve it to come back, and we may not have those additional funds at that time. We may end up having to come with a higher levy. But if so I think this tempers it. It creates a sort of a stepping stone until we can get to a point where we don't have a strategic instability between our revenue and our expenditures. And we will always look at what expenditures can we pull down at any one time. We've done as much as we know right now. Who knows what the future will hold? We'll never take that off the table as something to look at. It's not really, there's nothing left for us to look at today. So my recommendation is to look at moderate in the strategic opportunity, significant enough in the stabilization fund that the community knows we heard them, and then still leaving some unallocated for the things, as the mayor mentioned. There's still some things that come up throughout the budget cycle that were unanticipated, or additional retirements we weren't looking for that will cost us money. We need to maintain that money in there. And as the finance director has mentioned as well, we don't want to be so lean on savings that we can't accommodate any short-term cash flow. We have a large invoice that comes in right before property taxes. We don't want to be in a situation where we're trying to scramble to make that work. So we still have to have some general operating cash flow buffer. So we don't want to pull all of this money into either of these funds. So that balance to me feels like maximum of I'm 500,000 for the strategic opportunity. I mean, it got us a 2-acre lakefront park. I mean, there's something we can do with that amount of money. And then the budget stabilization fund, whatever we find, 2.5 million, we'd have to look at the policy, but we can do that. That's our job. So that would be kind of how I'm approaching this for my fellow colleagues. Mayor, you were
Yeah, I just being thoughtful about this. I would again, as an exercise to my colleagues and particularly to the community out there who, those of you out there who are listening or going to listen to this later who want to say, kick the can down the road. What's your solution?
Yeah.
Bring it. I'm going to say it again. Bring your A game, because you got nothing. I'm sorry. I'll take it in the nut on this one. If you do not have a solution in 4 years, maybe you move out of the community and then we have nothing and we're in a deeper hole than we were before. So we have to find a way, folks, of finding that balance of either investing in the community. And again, people are going to have a conspiracy theory that I have a grandiose scheme for doing something or other. I don't know what it is. I don't. I have a belief that we have to invest in our future. And kicking the can down the road 4 or 5 or 6 years, we're not going to get 4 or 5, 6 years. I can guarantee you, signing out the checks I've signed out this last week, we're not going to get down 4 or 5 years. There's not going to happen. So I think the most important thing is to think about what are the opportunities here to give the community an opportunity to give us input on what they want to see for services, what they want to see for investment in additional opportunities, and long-term financial security. And that's something that I'm going to continue to follow my sword about, because none of us will burn our savings to the ground before we start looking for really serious opportunities to change the narrative. So
Gonna reach out to my colleagues online, we've been talking a lot, just making sure you have an opportunity if you have any comments to make at this time. Saunders is giving me a thumbs up. Councilmember Muhlenberg, you're okay? Okay. Councilmember Goldman.
Yes, to sort of help guide the conversation, it seems like the budget stabilization question is the most complex. So I wanted to come back to the others first. What should the reserve percentage be? Should it be based on income or say revenue or expenses? The sense I'm getting, it hasn't really come up today, but the sense I have is that the consensus seems to be keep the reserve number at 16% and change it to be based on expenses rather than revenue. So I wanted to ask my colleagues, is that something we have a consensus on?
Councilmember Good?
You said exactly what I was going to say. So thank you very much, because if we have enough decision, we can mark one of these things off our list and say we've accomplished something. So I think that if that's right, it's easy to change. Let's do it. Okay, 16% of expenditures. Let's
Yes.
make it so.
And I think the only question is, do we want expenditures or revenues, whichever is higher? That kind of puts us in the biggest buffer as possible. That was actually suggested by our finance director.
Yeah.
Do you have a financial director opinion on that?
I say we can absolutely do revenue or expenditures, whichever's higher, and we'll just put it in the policy that way.
Sounds like I've got some thumbs up. So
3 thumbs up.
if you could bring a policy update around for us to be able to review, that'd be fantastic.
And if I may continue.
Yes.
So I'm glad we have consensus on those first 2 questions. The third one I think would be strategic opportunity. That has some policy implications, in terms of what the mayor talked about in terms of looking to the future. And so are we at the point where we might start proposing some numbers? I think I've heard 500,000. I think I've heard 1 million. But is that something we might try to reach consensus on? And then once we have those 3 questions answered, then we can turn our full attention to budget stabilization.
I agree. That's a wonderful idea. And let's start populating this spreadsheet that keeps, maddeningly no numbers in it, right? So I don't know, do we have the capacity to put numbers in that? Okay,
Yep.
great.
Bill's got it.
So can we put in 500,000 into the budget into the strategic opportunity fund? Great. Okay. So if I'm interpreting this correctly, because I have a slightly different set of colors on my spreadsheet, that the important numbers are under I guess that sort of salmon color, to call it something. It's that balance after shortfall excess included is negative.
Correct.
Okay, sorry, at the 31-32 biennium.
Yes.
Okay.
So by then we will be in debt 1.1 million if we do not produce additional revenue.
Okay, and that the reserve amount down there doesn't change because that's just based off of what we've calculated off of okay.
Calculated off of your.
Right. All right, so may I ask the city administrator then to put 1 million, let's say, into the budget stabilization fund? I want to see how that deficit changes.
Mhm.
Okay, so I think that increased the deficit by some
It
amount.
doesn't change it.
Okay,
What that budget stabilization fund in this scenario is doing is basically reserving that for only the purpose of providing ongoing operations so that we do not have to request a higher levy. So it doesn't change this calculation so much as it just reserves it so we can't use it for, so us and future councils can't use it for something else.
That's fair. So in other words, we're not inventing money. We're not losing any money off it.
Exactly,
Uh,
exactly. Sorry.
So if you look in line 14, in the three biennia after the current, you see the 333,000 and a bunch of threes after that. That is taking that $1 million and spreading it out through there. So it's going back, it becomes part of the revenue.
Mhm.
So it doesn't change the bottom line, but it is, as Councilmember Riddle said, using to buy down a potential rate, yeah,
Okay.
reallocation of the dollars. I would point out quickly, though, that with your decision to go off of expenditures or revenue, whichever is greater, that increases your reserve amount by about almost $200,000.
Okay. Thank you. All right, so this is basically not taking into account any kinds of, so the question I have here is with this budget then, is the police department fully staffed?
Yeah, everything.
Okay,
in-
yeah, all the,
Yeah, we
All the
don't, we
budget
don't
that-
project revenue and expenditures based off of, yeah, expenditures are based off of full staffing.
Okay,
That's what
fair.
I'm trying to say.
I'm gonna actually put a little hashtag on that, full current staffing.
Right.
Yeah, so this doesn't include any necessary increase over the next biennium.
Right.
Councilmember Good, I saw your hand.
Okay, so then the next step would be that we can see that we're gonna have a shortfall. So the next question is a proposed levy amount.
And so doing the numbers, I believe a 12-cent levy will just barely break us even
Yeah.
with the reserve amount when we get to that very last bottom right corner. City Administrator, would you try 12 cents for?
This is around with.
Yep,
Based off of the discussion, I changed it to be off of expenditures.
perfect.
Thank you.
So
Okay.
2,674,000, okay. And 12 cents will plop us just a little bit above that.
no, it's still gonna be big.
Because technically 11 cents, we're just shy.
Mhm.
And we're sticking with kind of whole cents, I think, at this point, because that's the
Right.
easiest way of dealing
Well,
with it.
well, certainly with 12 cents, we're under our reserve amount.
Yes, so we've got 400,000 over reserve, give or take, projected. And again, that is with no unanticipated additional life.
Mhm.
We're just the standard anticipated inflation. So if inflation exceeds
Can we try 15?
that, absolutely. So we can try 15 and see what buffer that provides us.
So
Yeah.
Team Table is gonna jump in here.
For sure.
So this is the danger of doing math on TV. Because with the quick change of jumping right into saying revenue or expenditure, Budget Chair Riddle, you absolutely were right. But now that we've updated and it's pulling from the expenditures, 12 cents, I think, was when we were basing it off of the revenue, it matched it when we were working with it previously. And now that we've grabbed the expenditures, so I'm just gonna say live example of doing math on TV. This is why we hesitate on that, because if you look at the fiscal year,
Lines 26 and 27 in fiscal year 31-32,
Mhm.
you'll notice that your unallocated savings are less than your reserve amount.
Right.
By 100 and whatever.
Could I say clarification? Row 26, is that the entirety of the general fund, or is that just the unallocated? So without, the reserves have already been removed from the general fund for the purposes of line 26.
Yeah, line 26 is, as it says, is the balance after, so you have if you start on line 24, the 8.5 million, then you take out your reserve amount of the 2.4 million. So you have the 6.1, then you take out your 1.9. Yeah, that's what you have left after all that calculation is done. So when you go to the next biennium and you see 6.5 million prior biennium balance, that is your 4 million roughly and your 2.4 million added together. You take that out again, you have 3.9 million, you take care of your balance, your shortfall of 3.4 million. Things are really scary.
Okay, but just to confirm, so we don't need to compare line 26 against 27. It's just a matter of how close do we want our unallocated reserves? Sorry, not reserves. How low do we want our unallocated general fund to get to zero?
Right.
Because once it hits zero, we have no cushion whatsoever for any unexpended increase in expenses.
Correct.
You
That is
can't even
correct,
approach it legally. It gets very challenging.
Yes. So that is correct. So I did misspeak. So that yes, so the lower right, line 26 and 31, 32, that is just the unallocated, unrestricted, for the most part, money. There's always an asterisk. Yes, Deputy Mayor.
Thank you. Can I ask the city administrator, can we get a copy of this spreadsheet included in kind of a revised version of this packet?
Mhm. Sure.
Okay.
Sorry, I wasn't on mic. Yes, we will send that out.
All right. Thank you.
We try 15.
Yeah. And so just looking at what is up there. Yes, if you would like to try 15, did I hear that number as the request? Okay, let's do a quick check at 15 and see what that looks like.
And if I can point one thing out as you're looking at the spreadsheet, keep your eyes on line 21 and 22, because what that's showing is the shortfall excess with levy funds added. So even in the first biennium, generating 1.7 million, it's the savings that's keeping you above water. Your levy rate is not covering the deficit. And that's a discussion for council and the mayor to have is, excuse me?
Yes.
Covering it as
And then
is.
No, yeah.
Yeah.
And so that's another discussion of, are you going out for the full amount today to cover that deficit and spending the dollars you have in reserves? You're setting aside $1 million and then, to buy down the rate, but then slowly eating away at those extra savings because you have that delta.
So if you wouldn't mind putting 20 cents in, so we can bracket our discussion. 20 cents provides us with, after the levy and including our structural deficit that we have already anticipated every biennium, that puts us where we're no longer dipping into the savings at all. After something like that, am I close with my
Yeah, you are.
statement there?
You
Okay.
are. It's no longer in the red for the purple area.
Yeah.
So
that's sort of one of our key points.
So
Yes.
So if I can turn Vice Chair Goldman's numbers on their head, then how about if we put $1 million, 500,000 in budget stabilization and just keep the levy rate as it is now. I'm kind of curious about this. 500,000 in budget stabilization and then 6 million into strategic opportunity. So if we're buying a building, basically it means we need about that much.
500,000, right?
Yeah.
In strategic opportunity.
Yeah. 6 million.
Oh, switch the numbers.
Yeah,
basically.
switch the
Switch
numbers.
the numbers.
I've
Right.
got that.
Okay, that's what
Yeah.
you were talking about. Okay.
I'm certainly intrigued by this.
Madam Chair,
Shall we noodle? What did we come up with?
I just wanted to say on point, again, I want to reiterate, there is no specific plan for buying a building. There are things percolating out there. Neighbors and friends have said these are good opportunities. To Administrator Hill's point, There has to be a a revenue building kind of exercise to make sure that we're doing the right thing. And I won't go anywhere into the weeds here. It's very preliminary, but the question of whether there's no question economies of scale apply when it comes to the courts. There's no question that there's economies of scale to a certain degree, certain level when it comes to policing. So if there are opportunities there, those things could take some burden off the general fund potentially, because the funds coming in from traffic camera revenues, for example, would be restricted.
Yep.
There are other things that are very, but there are some opportunities there because of economies of scale. Having said that, I also believe in the revitalization of our economic base of this city. And no matter what we decide right now, in 4 or 5 or 6 years, economic situation when it comes to retail, et cetera, and business challenges are not going to be that much different. We have no reason to believe things are going to change. It is my fervent belief, and I know there are other people in the community and elected officials that support this idea, that we have to take the driver's seat on some of these issues. So I'll leave it there. That's as far as I will go.
Councilmember Goldman.
Yes, so I recognize we don't have a whole lot of time before our general meeting starts. So I would pose a question for us to think about until next time. We reached consensus that we want 16% reserves based on expenses. But a related question, and I believe this is one that some just Councilmember Good asked last year, what is the appropriate level of unallocated funds in the general fund? That is, if our current unallocated general fund is approximately 8.5 million as of the end of this year, should it be lower than that, and by how much? And I'm not going to propose a number. I learned my lesson from last time, but I do think it's important that we have that conversation and think, would we want to try to keep the unallocated general fund close to 5 million? Would we want to get it closer to 2 million? Do we want to get it closer to 0? What is the level that we feel comfortable on? Because it is something the community has brought up.
Thank you. Councilmember Good. Oh, wait, Councilmember Rose now. I apologize. I saw your hand go.
Oh, just on that point, maybe on a related point, I do think that it will be really valuable for us and the community if somewhere in a final budget document, in a spreadsheet, if when we know what the structural deficit is going to be, if there is a number, a line that a cell that we can point to in a spreadsheet, a line number in a document that we can say, this number right here, this is what the structural deficit is next year, the year after that, or the biennium after that, the biennium after that. I think the harder it is for people to find that, the harder it is for them to understand what that really entails, and the weirder that the conversations are going to get. So whether we represent that in unallocated balance, whether we represent it in budget stabilization or some other defined fund, I don't have strong opinions about, but I do feel strongly that it should be somewhere that you can point to.
So I think if the city administrator would entertain zeroing out the 3 variables there other than reserves, that'll get us to, again, where we are anticipated right now, where our 6-year financial projections take us right now from our last budget. And what you'll see is 2.2 million, 2.5 million, 2.6 million, give or take. 246, just about $7 million. He made a calculation.
$7,283,092.01.
And then
In today's dollars.
in today's
Today's
dollars,
dollars.
and if you look at 27-28 and you look down into pink, there is 6 million is our amount remaining after we pull out the reserves at the end of the 27-28 biennium. So we start with the 8.57, we have to take the 2 million out, then we have to kind of account for reserves. And then once we account for, so once we account for everything, we have so little money technically left. if we were to try to cover all of these structural deficits, we'd have no funds at the end. We'd have no funds to do anything unique. We'd have no funds to accommodate any surprises, generally speaking, right? It's big general statements. We can play with the numbers more specifically, but for those that are interested, 7 point something million. 7.2 million. And that's basically all we have right now. So for those that want to say, well, let's spend that money down first, I think what we have to determine is how much do we want to continue rolling in for opportunities outside of even the strategic opportunities, and to just address the volatility of the world we live in. We live in a world where oil prices are going up, costs of goods are going to go up. Our anticipated annual revenue inflation is likely way too small at the moment. So when we pull that all in, it looks like that even if we put money in budget stabilization, that we'll still need a levy to keep ourselves afloat. And
that's
so
why I think where I come back to really wanting to be sure that we are representing that in some clear way in the final budget document. I mean, the spreadsheet is a really valuable exercise, but people may not dig into it. I just really want to be sure that someone who is coming to this fresh when they get their ballot in the mail is able to look at it and say, oh, that's what's happening. Because I think that tells a story, right? What you just said, I think is really important. It's essential for anyone making that decision, which they will be at the ballot box, of like, there is not enough money to allocate across the next 6 years and maintain the status quo even.
thank you, Councilmember Rosenau. I know that we need a few minutes to switch over to business meeting. Mine thought, we're about 5 minutes out. Do we have any closing thoughts before we allow staff to reset? Looks like Deputy Mayor has a closing thought.
I was going to adjourn the meeting, but basically, yeah, if somebody has a closing thought.
Okay,
Okay.
looks like we're good.
All right. So thanks everybody for the robust discussion, and we'll of course continue this discussion. So with that, I'll adjourn the meeting.
Thanks, Sarah.
Yeah.